Hey, what's going on, champs? I'm Aaron Deliosa. Welcome to an Immigrant's Life podcast, my podcast about immigrants, immigration, and everything in between. Here we are again. New week, new conversation with another amazing guest. But before we get into that, I want to thank you for joining me every week. Thank you for accompanying me to this journey. I really do appreciate it. If you're new here and you want to know more about the podcast, or if you want to see what the upcoming episode will be about, you can check me out on Instagram and Facebook at An Immigrant's Life. If you like listening and you want us to see some pictures of the guests or what have you, you can go to YouTube where I post the podcast and you can see some pictures while listening. Speaking of YouTube, for the YouTube subscribers, please do me a favor and also go follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast. I'll much appreciate it. Okay, that's that. That takes care of the business. Now let's talk about the episode. Guys, I'm not gonna lie, when I invited this guest to come on the podcast, I didn't think she would do it, because I felt like I didn't want to bother her from her busy schedule of saving the world, like literally. But thankfully, she agreed to do it, which just shows what an amazing person she is. And it's an absolute honor to have a distinguished guest like her. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Isa, dalawa, tatlo. Today's guest makes me proud to be a Filipino. She's a social activist, an author, and overall an amazing person. She's a triple threat on stage, and she'll also threat you with her mean left hook. Everyone, please welcome Tricia Jose.
Thanks so much. That was a great intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Tricia Jose. My family is from the Philippines, and I came to Canada when I was very young, 2 or 3 years old. We immigrated into BC, but I'm currently working in Toronto, working on different products in tech. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's an honor for you to come on.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really, really nice intro. So I don't know. We'll see how the rest of the conversation goes, but that was very kind.
So you mentioned that your family moved here to Canada. Did you guys move here at the same time, or somebody came before you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. We all came at the same time, and actually, my mom used to work for the Canadian Embassy back in the Philippines. So when I was very young, we actually visited Ottawa, I believe, just for a trip that she was doing for work. And when she had come to Canada, she thought it was so beautiful. So she told all the family back in the Philippines, she said, "This is the place to be, guys. We have to go." So of course, my parents and myself, we immigrated to BC, but also all my dad's side of the family ended up coming. So I grew up with many of my cousins on my dad's side around, and all my aunts and uncles. Our first house, we actually all lived together, like much like Full House, the TV show. I think at the time there was probably only 10 of us. Like, it was smaller families. We didn't have everybody there, but it was a really, really lovely way to come to Canada. At least for me, I was a kid. I felt like everybody there was with me. I never felt alone. So we all came all together when I was, like I said, I think 2 or 3, very, very young.
How many rooms in the house?
Oh, that's a detail that I was too young to remember, but I remember it having an upstairs and a downstairs. And my cousin's family lived downstairs and we lived upstairs. So I think it had at least 3 or 4 bedrooms. That house is foggy in my memory. It's been a long time since I've gone to that house. So
that's all right.
Yeah.
Your family still owns the house?
No. So after, I think, when you find a few families all live together, they realize that having personal space is really nice too. So after a couple years, all the families moved into their own respective homes. So we moved into a townhouse. My cousins moved into a townhouse. But all of this to say that actually up until now, well, COVID withstanding, that family still gets together every Sunday to hang out and spend time with each other. So we still really like each other's company, just not enough to live together all in one house. But it's one of the things actually that I missed most when I moved to Toronto is the time with family. Family was such an important part of my life growing up and still is. So Yeah, we didn't end up staying in that house for longer than a year.
Okay. Yeah, that happened to me too when we moved here. But we live in
Mhm.
an apartment, but a three-bedroom apartment. But there were like, I think we're 9 people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a multi-generational housing. It's a nice again, I was really young, so I think when I look at my experiences working with newcomers at Arrive, which is the company I built at RBC Ventures,
Mm.
it's actually it actually was a blessing in disguise to have so many family around all the time. I never felt alone, and again, I was probably too young to really know much better. But I just look upon that time with really, really happy memories. So
Mm.
wouldn't change it for the world.
That's awesome. So, how was your childhood in Vancouver?
It was great. I think what is interesting is because I came to Canada at a very young age, um, I had only spent so much time in the Philippines. And so growing up, I knew I was Filipino and my family was Filipino, but a lot of my friends were not Filipino, or if they were Filipino, they were born in Canada. So I think I was really trying to figure out during my um, growing up years really how to marry being Canadian and being Filipino and what that meant for my identity. So my mom and my dad will say that there was a time where I actually shifted from calling them mama and papa to mom and dad. And when I asked them, please don't pack me, I want a sandwich for lunch instead of having rice. And I and I think about that time, and it makes me a little bit sad because I think I just didn't know how to put those two cultures together. I think there's so much
Mm.
beauty and richness in the Filipino culture that actually, as an adult, I came to appreciate and love a lot more. But yeah, otherwise, a very happy childhood. Really, really loved meeting all the new friends. Like I came before that sort of critical age where I had already formed um, a lot of connections in the Philippines. I was so young that the
Mm.
majority of my life that I remember was in Canada.
Mm. So, how was going to school? Did you make a lot of friends? Was it a mixture of friends, or did it like stay with the Filipino community?
It was a mixture of friends, and I think it's because BC, where my family lived, Richmond, which is just south of Vancouver,
Mm.
is very diverse. So I had a lot of friends. I had some Filipino friends, but like I said, they were mostly second generation Filipinos. So were born in Canada, and then I had friends that were not Filipino. So I had quite a range of um, of backgrounds that my friends had. But I think the beautiful thing as a kid too is that you're not always aware of where people are from or what accent they have. Everyone is just a person.
Mm.
So yeah, I had quite a lot of different friends, and some that I actually am still friends with to this day. So um, I loved my elementary school. It was the best thing ever.
Yeah. Did Were you a good kid, or did you get in
Oh, it's so
trouble?
good. This is the nicest, best kid ever. I think I was actually very well behaved.
Mm.
Between my brother and I, he's definitely the angel child between the two of us. I think I was not necessarily rebellious, but I knew what I wanted, and I would always challenge my parents. So growing up, we had a lot of very loud discussions where I wanted to do certain things and ask for certain things. So I was a good kid, but I definitely was probably not as easy to deal with than I think my younger brother was.
Okay. It's always like that. It's always like the eldest will be like a troublemaker or what have you, and the second one will be like the nice one.
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. He's the nice one. He's the kind, good one. I think I was on with a little bit of fire, but I think in all things considered, I would still say I was a good kid. Though I did in my 20s apologize to my mom for the heartache that I caused her. I was like, I'm sorry, mom, you're the best. Um, so yeah, I think all things considered was a good kid, but definitely gave my parents some grief. Um,
Mm.
Unfortunately.
That's your hero's journey.
I think it's just called being a teenage girl. I think teenage
Exactly.
girls make up for how kind and gentle they are growing up, and that's when boys are crazy, like the 5-year-old, 6-year-old age, and
Mhm.
girls are really calm and tame. And then when they hit their teens, they become a different kind of monster. So, so I definitely lived that, and I apologize to my parents. But yeah,
I mean,
we're on the good side now, I think.
that's awesome. So you mentioned something about you were having issues with your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some reading and research about you. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw one thing that you wrote that you said, and I quote, growing up in Canada and not understanding how to reconcile where I came from and where I wanted to belong, I actively rejected my Filipino background and embraced all things Canadian, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it was sort of what I was alluding to earlier, where I saw that I knew I was Filipino, but I was growing up in Canada. So I didn't have any strong connections to what it meant to be Filipino other
Mhm.
than my family's culture and my family's practices. But I really associated that with just our family. I didn't really think about that beyond our family circle or our family bubble. And because my friends were largely second generation or people who were non-Filipino,
Hmm.
um, where I found commonalities with them were not typically things that were what I knew as a Filipino. So I was finding it like, I mean, a trivial example is um, I wanted to go for a sleepover, but my parents were more strict than other parents. So they said I couldn't have a sleepover, and I could never understand why I couldn't have that. And so there were just little micro incidents where I think if I had the liberty to decide between a Filipino practice, like again, the mama papa calling of my parents versus the Canadian mom dad, I think when you're a kid, you just want to belong. So I chose not to be different, and I just joined my friends calling their parents mom and dad. I wanted to eat sandwiches. I wanted to do the things that made me feel, quote unquote normal. And I think now I look back and I realize that there's no such thing as just a normal way of living. But
Mhm.
I think, again, when you're a kid, you don't really see how you're different. And in fact, you try to hide the ways that you're different. So, yeah, it was definitely something that I didn't quite understand. And because when we left the Philippines, I hadn't gone back in several years. And it had been only a couple trips
Mhm.
where we just visited with family. Like I just never really fully grasped what that meant,
Mhm.
what that meant to be Filipino, how that impacted my life. So I just chose to ignore it. And I chose to, if I could, show that I wasn't that interested in it, to show that I was different, which again, I'm not necessarily proud of, but I think it's something that you grapple with if you're young and you're growing up in a different environment.
Mhm. But you were never ashamed being Filipino.
No, I wouldn't say ashamed. It's just that I think I found pride in the fact that I was like everybody else in the ways that I wanted to be like everybody else, and I was different from what I might have considered. So another very trivial example is I think there's some tropes around or some things that people associate with being Filipino, such as like, oh, we like to sing karaoke. Um, and I love karaoke, to be honest. Like it's my stress relief. Like I love to sing. But growing up, I actually was like, no, I don't like karaoke, because I thought that it helped separate me from, I think, what I saw as something that everybody else was like.
Mhm.
So I think it was not very shame. It was just, I think I wanted to show that I was part of this group and not that group, which I think is just, again, a kid thing. Because I think if I had gone to school with a lot of Filipinos, I probably would have done the opposite. I think it was just because I was surrounded by people who were different than me, but similar with each other. I wanted to be like them. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't think it was shame. I wouldn't say shame per se, but I think I was definitely confused about how to marry those two identities.
Mm. So after high school, you went to university.
Hmm. Yeah. So my high school experience was interesting because I went to an all girls high school. Um, and so, and my mom she works in technology. And I was like in high school very involved. I got very good grades. I was a student council president and did like musicals and stuff. So I never thought that there was nothing I couldn't do. I had great role models. I was at a school that nurtured, um, um, any ability that you had. And then when I went to university, I was super surprised because there is this conception that men are smarter than women or men are better at other things. And so I mean, common theme, I guess, is I was confused a lot, but I was like, why are girls so quiet? I started to pursue computer science in university, and there were mostly, I used to make a joke that one of the perks was that I had the female bathroom as a clubhouse for myself, just because there was no other women in computer science. But again, looking back, I think of that as so problematic. Like, I should have been really trying to convince other women to join computer science. But again, I think I saw that being a part of a group where others like me were not a part of was something to be proud of. But again, now looking back in retrospect, I don't think that is something to be proud of. I think it shows that there's something that needs to be changed. So yeah, really interesting transition from high school to university, always surrounded by women like me, like really amazing, talented women. And then in university, being surrounded by a bunch of men. It was just a different environment that I kind of moved into.
I like that you mentioned about that you went to computer science, because I want to ask your opinion about, you remember the Google memo?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
The Google memo, as in
the James Damore memo that he was saying that women doesn't go to tech because of like men are more driven or something like that.
Oh yeah. I think that part of the problem that I think with the way that our world is it's very black and white. Like, I'm Filipino, I'm not Filipino. I'm there's man versus women. Like, I think there's a lot of intersectionality. And I think that when you start to understand individuals for who they are, considering all their different visible and invisible, like if they're a visible minority or invisible minority or whatever it is, all their different parts of their identity, I think that you start to value people beyond just, oh, a man is this and a woman is this. I think a Filipino is this, a non-Filipino is this. And I think part of the challenge of that thinking, where it is very black and white, is that we tend to create us and them. So when we hear memos like that, or like men are like this and women like this, my immediate reaction as a woman is to say, you know what? Forget you guys. We're going to do our own thing because you're not helping us. I think you actually need both parties in order to move things forward. Like, you need strong allies and you need strong champions that are not like you. And as a, this is an immigrant podcast. I think even for immigrants, I think knowing for myself and for the people that I know who are people of color, we're often championed by people who are not people of color. And I think it's in those intersections, it's the intermingling, it's the recognizing what people bring to the table that actually helps move the needle forward, as opposed to, oh, you know what, men are this way and women are this way. So, and I don't think it's the right takeaway that men are the enemy in the cases of like the gender differences in pay and everything in the tech industry. I think it's more so to say we need to find and make sure we're intentional about bringing more women to the table. There's not only one seat for a woman, there's actually many seats, and it's now trying to lift each other up, et cetera, et cetera. So I find those pieces a bit challenging, because I definitely disagree, but at the same time, I think that the overwhelming response is problematic as well. And then we never actually end up getting to a productive state. So, I've done a lot of thinking around about what it means to move certain things forward, especially with respect to representation and stuff like that. So I do think it requires a bit of a team effort and a bit more intentionality than you guys are the enemy and we need to move this forward, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. But I agree, women are more smarter.
Definitely.
I don't want to argue with that. It's true. But thank you for that. That's really well thought of. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it honestly just comes from when I reflect back on my own experiences, I recognize that it's not just because of stuff that I've done that has been, that I've been able to do what I've been able to do. I think it's a lot of people who have championed me, mentored me, et cetera. And they're not all people that I can see exactly me. There's been enough of people where like again, my mom, I see her, she works in tech and she's a woman. It's amazing. But at the same time, there's also been a lot of really great men that have opened doors for me, et cetera. So I think it's recognizing that it's not just a binary this or that. I think it's actually a little bit more complex like that. And I think that's where you get really amazing results. So
Yeah.
those are just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't like that idea that, oh, we have to have at least 3 women at the table. What if the woman's not good enough?
Yeah, I think the challenge with quota, I think that the challenge is like how to get from where we are today to where we want to be. And I think sometimes quotas are a meaningful way of getting there because we don't have the way to source, like we don't have equity in sourcing talent. So it will always be that we'll fill it with men. So I also am not a big fan of quotas per se, but I think sometimes it's a bridging solution to get from where we are today to where we want to be tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it opens a door.
Yeah, I think I remember when I was chatting with this venture capitalist, there's a stat that goes around in the startup world that women are funded at a fraction of what men are funded at. And the reason, and it's true. And some of the takeaways, again, like in us versus them, is that, oh, women don't pitch well, or women don't do this, women do that, and where men are more this and that. But I think what it really is that when you look at people who are evaluating the VCs, they're primarily men. So how do you improve those outcomes? You actually do need to create a quota to put a woman at the table so that you can, so it's a bit of a chicken and egg. But it's not the end all be all solution. I think there's education. I think there's conversation that needs to happen, but those conversations are only productive if it's not a walled conversation. Like if there's openness on both sides, and then you also create those gates, like sometimes quotas do help so that you can start to connect the dots to get there, but definitely not an end all be all solution.
Yeah, I agree with that. So at the beginning, I mentioned that you're a triple threat on stage. I would like to talk about your play that you created with your brother, I believe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned that family is super important to me. And I also mentioned that a lot of the things I think about have to do with the fact that I look back and I have gratitude for all the people in my life that have shaped it. So, a big theme in what I do is, I think you mentioned it earlier too, is just around social impact and advocacy. And that comes a lot from that desire to pay forward some of the really amazing things that I've just had experience that, again, I don't think that it has anything to do with what I've done. I just have been fortunate to be in certain situations and certain circumstances. So I often think of that. With the musical, I actually did it with, I mentioned, like I said, family is important. So the musical is a collaboration between my brother and my parents and I. My parents actually met in the Philippines working on plays and musicals as fundraising projects within their parish. So that's how they met. That's how they fell in love, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that they've always been involved with. And then a few years ago, actually more than a few years ago now, time is tricky, but I think in 2012, we were approached by a charitable organization that actually does a lot of outreach work in the Philippines that my family supports. So they send kids to school, they do child sponsorship, they build homes. And they had approached my parents with this concept, knowing sort of this legacy that preceded them, because they did some of that work in Canada too. We're interested in putting together this Filipino musical called Magsimulaka, and will you guys lead it for us so that we can increase awareness of our charity? My parents were like, for sure. My brother and I like to think I'm good at Tagalog, but definitely not good enough to do a whole musical. But the whole musical was in Tagalog, and we're like, you know what, let's just do it. So we started to do auditions. We held auditions and everything for the show. And somewhere, I don't know exactly how it happened, but somewhere in between, the rights to the show fell through. So we had held these auditions, but we didn't have a show. So my parents, the masterminds behind everything that the reason why I think the way I think and everything I do, they said to us, they're like, why don't we write a show? And we're like, what do you mean? And so my mom, she said, she told us the concept. She's like, imagine that there's a bunch of kids, there's a bunch of university grads, and they're about to see the world. And they're excited. And she's told us the essence. She's like, just try writing a song. My brother and I sat, locked ourselves in a room, wrote the song. Then when it was done, we're like, oh, that was pretty cool. That was pretty good. So We built a show off of that. And I wouldn't suggest that this is the right way to write a show, but as we were doing rehearsals, we would add songs based on, and it was kind of cool that way because
Wow.
the talents that we had in the cast, we would tailor the songs around what they could do. So it felt like a perfect fit because it really was. We had a woman with a beautiful soprano voice, so we wrote her this really beautiful song. We had our lead at the time was 16, I think 15, 16 years old, had a beautiful voice. So we made her the lead. So we scrapped that original show, and it was honestly the best thing we could have done. We put on the show for 2 showings in 2013 at the River Rock Theatre in Richmond, BC, which has a capacity of 1,000 people. So we sold out both shows. Then we're like,
Sold
cool.
out.
Sold out both shows. We're like, okay,
Wow.
cool. So that was done. Really great experience, raised a bunch of money. The next year, another group approached us like, can you do this again? So we did it again. Then we did it again. And we did it. So we ended up showing the show 9 times, I believe, over the course of 5 years. We raised $300K for international and local charities. And we actually, for our second last show, we took it on tour to San Francisco, where we put on the show there. And it was also sold out. So it was one of the most joyful projects I had ever done with my family. Wow. And we met some really amazing friends through it. So it was called Right Here, Right Now. So it was in English. It was not a Tagalog show, but really proudly. And this was an unintended outcome, is that the majority of our cast and crew were Filipino Canadians. So really showcased the talents of the Filipino community in Canada. And was it just, again, a really beautiful coming together of community, completely volunteer based. Nobody was paid for their time there. Nobody was paid, not even me. It was really a showcase of people's time, talents, and treasure, and being in a spirit of service, which was really like the reason why people were there. Were not just because they were talented, but because they also had a heart to serve others, and they knew where this project was going. So the people who were super talented, some of them were there, but they didn't have the heart of service, so they actually excused themselves. So yeah, it was
like,
it was
screw this, man, I'm leaving.
Yeah. They're like, wait, there's no money here. But it was really cool, and it was an all original show. So my brother and I wrote, I think I'm losing track now. I think 13 or 14 songs.
Just you and him writing it.
Just me and my brother. He's the prodigy for sure. I was just I was just supporting him.
Standing there to look cute and everything.
I wrote the lyrics and he wrote the music.
Wow.
But and then we had a cast of varying sizes over the years, but I think always between around 20 and 30 to 35 people. Mm-hmm. So it was great, and I love all those people. Every time I see them, it's the best.
Very impressive, man. Have you ever thought of like selling the rights for it to be like in Broadway or something like that?
We've thought about it. I think my brother has put it on SOCAN, so the music is like legally protected and everything, but we haven't gone through that exercise of selling the rights. I think we'd like to write another show in the future. So that's something that we want to do. But in the period that we were doing the show, I actually moved to Toronto, and collaborating over FaceTime is not quite the same as in person. So that's slowed our progress a little bit. Mm-hmm. But actually a lot of those individuals, we did a smaller, very, very small project with them last year, when the pandemic was first announced in March, and we called it Project Quarantine, which is like quarantine but a choir, and we got around 200 people from around the world, and we did a virtual choir. My brother and I put it together, so a lot of the folks from the musical are also seen there. But music is just such a powerful way, I think, of bringing people together, and that's why I love it.
Yeah, it's true. It doesn't matter what language you speak, music speaks to your heart.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And I like that you mentioned quarantine, because I was going to talk about that too the next.
Yeah. It's just there's a lot of similar participants, so was just gonna address that one.
So you mentioned you moved to Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
What's the reason?
What's the reason? I did a master's in biomedical engineering. So
what is that?
So
you're too smart for me.
Biomedical engineering is and it's an engineering discipline, but really focused on the biomedical field. So anything with application to health or healthcare services or health sciences. So I chose to do that. So I mentioned earlier I did computer science, and I worked as a software developer a little bit. But I really again, my parents, I go back to them. They're the reason why I make decisions that I make. This desire to do something that was bigger than myself or that impacted my community in a bigger way than just existing was always present. So I thought doing a master's would be a really great way to do that. So what I worked on was, it was in the Intelligent Assistive Technology Lab, which means that it was, I worked on a thesis that built like an autonomous wheelchair for older adults with cognitive impairment. So it was like some self-driving car technology, but in a wheelchair for people who have like dementia or other cognitive impairments. So that's what I came out to Toronto to do. So I completed my master's at U of T.
So you went to school for that, but now you live in Toronto.
Yeah. So I did my undergrad in BC, and then I came out here to do my master's. So I came here and I was studying, and then I ended up staying in Toronto because during my master's I started a company, and then that company led me to RBC and starting Arrive there. So I just ended up staying. I haven't left since.
Yeah, I like that Arrive, by the way. Can we talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's very, very applicable. So when sort of the bridge between what I've shared and Arrive, when I started a company, I found myself meeting RBC, and I thought, and RBC was in the middle of doing something really interesting, which was creating a new group called RBC Ventures. RBC Ventures is really focused on going beyond banking for its clients and its prospective clients, and looking at underserved markets to see how we can serve them better. And I was really passionate about the newcomer space because during the formation of my company prior to that, I really fell in love with the immigrant storyline. I think there's a lot of sacrifice that people make so that they can have a better life for their family. And I think it's just the amount of riskiness and the amount of things that people go through. And it's not easy to come to a new country. I sort of fell in love with that story. So when I came to RBC, I really wanted to work on something in that space. And another lady named Chica, she was also researching in that space. We started to work together, and we found that a lot of the problems that existed for our parents when they immigrated still exist today. It's still not super clear cut how to immigrate. It's still a bit, there's a lot of feelings of loneliness or feeling overwhelmed. And so we wanted to set out to fix that for newcomers. So that's how Arrive was born. Arrive is really RBC going beyond banking for newcomers to Canada. And trying to support newcomers from every step of their journey, from when they apply to come to Canada all the way till when they officially become Canadian and get citizenship, et cetera. So I've been working on it for 3 years. It's been really, really lovely. Have some awesome stories of people that we've met and chatted with along the way. But that's sort of how I got to here through that wayward journey of everything I talked about earlier.
Yeah, your articles are awesome.
That's awesome. I will tell our content team.
But yeah, I read it and I said, yeah, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, that makes sense. Some people should know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it an office? Like people comes in? How does it work?
Arrive. So, I mean, we used to have an office, but because of COVID, we are all working from home. But essentially what we do is we have a team that works on 2 primary products. One is our website, which you've seen, and that's where we have articles and different content and resources every day that we update that are relevant to newcomers. So when the CERB was first announced in Canada to supplement income, we were one of the first outlets to talk about how that could impact newcomers and what newcomers need to know about it. So we're really trying to stay on top of what's happening in Canada and beyond, and provide that level of support to newcomers. And then we've recently also revamped our application. So previously it was like a networking tool for newcomers, and now we're really focused on a deep content experience. We aim to be sort of like your masterclass or Peloton experience, but for newcomer content coming to Canada. So that's what the team really works on. And then we have amazing partners, of course, with RBC, that if people need help with other topics, we try to connect people as best we can. So one of our team members we hired because she was a newcomer to Canada, and I saw her in a WhatsApp chat. She was sharing some of her blogs, and I was like, that's amazing. So I reached out to her. We met for coffee, and then now she's our lead digital marketer. So
Wow.
yeah, really awesome stories and people that I've met through Arrive.
Yeah, you guys are doing God's work.
It's lots of fun, and it's amazing that the people that we meet, because Canada is very fortunate. We have so many incredible people coming to Canada and making this their home. So I think the least we can do is try to make that journey a little bit less stressful or a little bit more clear. So that's the goal.
Hmm. That's one thing I like about your articles are things that no one talks about, no one realizes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, you need to set up bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's one thing I like about Arrive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the goal. And hopefully we'll be able to expand to, because right now we're focused a lot on content, of course, in the GTA, but I think we're looking at introducing a lot more provincial specific content in the next little bit so that anyone immigrating to any of the other great provinces will have content at their disposal.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thanks.
It's awesome. Also, you also do run a group called We Represent.
Yeah, We Represent is a nonprofit that I started with a friend of mine. And it really actually touches on a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier, which is around representation and how, and really the thesis around that is that there's this concept of if you can see it, you can be it. So how do we provide good role models for young people? How do we help people who are underrepresented become the future change makers of the world? So really it's around like uplifting underrepresented voices, leveling the playing field a little bit. I think something that we talk about often is that talent is distributed equally, but opportunity isn't. So how can we help democratize access to opportunity? And it's really focused on youth. So we work a lot with high school students, and I say young people, but really young is it depends on who's asking. So younger people.
How do you help those young people, as you said?
Yeah, so we've done a couple things. We've run a couple competitions. So the first year, what we did was we created a prompt, so an underrepresented woman in history, and students were asked to submit a creative work. So we got some spoken word poetry, some original music, some film, some actual visual art. And then we awarded a winner, and then we have scholarship prizing and a fellowship. The last year we did one that was the prompt was around climate change. So how do you improve climate change? And they were asked to create a business. So it was an entrepreneurship challenge. So we actually are in an interesting part where we're looking at some of our programming and looking how we can revise it for the upcoming years. But we also did a lot of programming with existing organizations in schools. So we'd go into schools or into conferences and then do a program on ideation or representation for young people. So yes, it was very busy. It's been very busy with that, but right now, currently revising our programming to look at what we want to do, especially now with the COVID lens on everything, what is the best way to proceed. But yes, lots of fellowship, scholarship programming, that kind of thing.
So it's only in Toronto, or can anyone sign up?
The first year was only in the GTA because it was an in-person event. Last year, we opened it up across Canada just because it was digital. It was a virtual event. So we weren't constrained by in-person requirements. But the goal is, of course, reaching as many people as we can. So we have our sites definitely beyond just Toronto. It just so happens that we're both here. So that's where a lot of our conversations happen.
Okay. So let's focus on back to your personal side. And this one thing I love is you wrote a children's storybook.
Yeah. Yeah, it was lots of fun. It was, again, another just joyful project to do. I was feeling frustrated during the pandemic because it's a very overwhelming time. There's a lot of people in need and a lot of inequality that's just the gap is sort of widening between the polar ends of the spectrum. And so I was feeling really overwhelmed, like, what can we do? How can we help? And as a creative exercise to myself, I started to write the story around essentially not trying to do everything, and sometimes little actions are the most impact. And I wrote it from the perspective of my dog Penny, because she
She's
looks
a
like a
cutie,
human.
by the way.
Yeah, she looks like a human, and I don't know what she's thinking. So it was fun. And I wrote it, and then I read it, and I was like, oh, it's actually, yeah, it's not bad. So I sent it to some friends and some family, and they were like, this is really cute. And so I thought, like, why not put it in the world, like see if it'll help anybody else. So I messaged one of my friends who actually was part of our musical Right Here, Right Now. And that's how I met her. She was in our cast, and she's a very talented illustrator. So I asked her, hey, can you illustrate this book? It's just like a fun project. She's like, yeah, like I think so. So we worked back and forth on it. And then during the holidays, I figured out how to self-publish, put it on Amazon. And then I've been so overwhelmed with, it's only been a couple of weeks, but having been getting so much love from people, like parents, kids, dogs, you name it. It's been a really, really lovely response. And I think a lot of people have said it's such a appropriate message for the times of when you're feeling stuck. Like, it's just about doing little things and having a lot of love in those little things that you do. And that's really the most that we can do. And oftentimes it means more than we could ever imagine. So yeah, very, very fun project. And I am going to write more. There's more on the way. So it's not what I do for my day job for sure, but it's just a really wonderful way to be creative, but also still spread positivity and a good message. So yeah, it was really fun. It was very, very, very recent project, but
yeah,
really,
you're right. Can you mention the title?
Yes, it's called Penny Tries to Boil the Ocean. And it's a story about making a difference. And the reason why it's called Penny Tries to Boil the Ocean is because boil the ocean is a business idiom that is used in Canada. And it really means to try and do too many things, like take on an impossible project. And I've always been a boil the ocean kind of girl. My mom
I can tell.
My mom used to always warn me. She's like, don't boil the ocean. You're not going to get anything done like that. So it's a reminder not to boil the ocean. It's a reminder that it's little actions that make the biggest difference.
How do you self-publish?
I publish through Amazon, which is, they've got a service called Kindle Direct Publishing, and it's a print on demand service, which means I don't have to buy like tons and tons of stock. Because I wasn't sure, honestly, I didn't know how many people wanted this book. It was my first book. So I was like, I could get 100, but maybe I would not sell them. I could get 10, I could get 1,000. So this way, when people order, the book gets printed and then shipped, which is amazing. And honestly, the response has been greater than I could have imagined for a couple weeks in. So it's been great.
It's very awesome. I see the stories that you post. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm happy for you.
Thanks.
I mentioned that because I also wrote a children's storybook, but I never published it.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah, it's not as hard as you think, I think, is what I realized. It's just a little bit of patience. But I looked at going down the traditional publishing route, but ultimately my goal was just to get it to as many people as I could, given the timeliness of the story. And this was just a way to get it out much faster. And yeah, I think it's really, really, it's been really great.
Does your parents live in Toronto, or they're back in BC?
They're back in BC, unfortunately. So yeah, I miss my family. That's for sure.
That must be hard for you.
Yeah, we saw them in the summer, but I hope to see them very soon when this lockdown is done.
They're doing okay?
Yeah, they're doing great.
I know your mom she was sick for a bit.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough 2020 for many reasons, some family health issues and stuff like that, but super thankful that everybody is in good health as much as possible right now. So just another reminder, at least for me, the reminder is not everything matters. So only focus on the things that matter in life, and life is short. So you might as well be spending it doing things that have a purpose. Otherwise, what's the point? So 2020 was definitely a year of refocusing because of what was happening in the world, but also personally.
What is your opinion about COVID? Are we gonna be out soon, or what's happening?
I before I answer, I think one of the things I heard from someone in a story that they were telling is that there's a difference between an optimist and a realist. An optimist is a person that is like almost ignoring reality, and they're saying it's going to get better, everything's going to be great. And the optimist is always disappointed because ultimately, if you're saying by Sunday we should be out, it's not going to happen. The realist is a person that still maintains hope, but also is aware of the situation. So I consider myself, or I try to consider myself, a realist. So I do think that this will end. I don't have a date in my mind of when it will end. I don't think and I think I had a lot of thoughts on this at the end of the 2020 year because a lot of people were really looking forward to January 1st.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not going to change on January 1st. Like it's going to be the exact same thing. But I think knowing the hope that it will be better and I will get to hug my loved ones and I will get to high five people again. Like I think that keeps me motivated, and knowing that we're keeping each other safe, like that keeps me going through the 8-week lockdown that we've been in Ontario. But so I do think it's going to end. I just couldn't tell you by June 1st, we're going to be allowed to gather in groups of 50. Like it's so hard to predict that it's almost not worth it. In my opinion.
You're right. So with all the achievements and accomplishments, what's your next big goal?
Oh, I'm working on a project that's very much under wraps. So you'll have to wait and see.
I'm not going to tell anyone.
You'll have to wait and see in the next couple of months. But I am working on some new things that I think will be interesting. I'm obviously working on another book, but yeah, fingers crossed. I don't want to jinx anything as well. So I'll just keep working away at some stuff and then hopefully it will see the light of day. But if it doesn't, that's also how it goes. So there are things to come, but you'll have to probably ask me in 3 to 4 months when I'm able to bring it to light.
We'll do. So I think we're there, but do you have any last remark or parting message?
No, I think it was really great chatting with you. I think that for anyone listening to this, I know it's focused on different people's stories from an immigrant perspective. So I think if you're listening to this, if someone's listening to this and they're a person who has recently completed their immigration journey or is thinking about it, I think all the kudos to you. It's not an easy journey. And I think people like yourself, Aaron, or other people who do act as champions for these important stories are so needed. Because of everything that I said earlier. It's not ultimately when we come to Canada, it's not just an immigrant and then a non-immigrant place to live. Like we're all united and we're all connected. So I think the more that we can help each other and be there for each other, that's really what Arrive was all about. And that's what I think you're trying to do with this podcast and many others. So keep up the great work to them, keep up the great work to you. Like it's very, very important work that doesn't go unnoticed.
Wise word from a wise woman. Thank you again, Tricia, for coming and doing the podcast. I really do appreciate it. It is an honor.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Bye. Again, Tricia, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, listeners, for listening every week. This is Aaron Deliosa for An Immigrant's Life. See you guys later.